Have you ever looked at your life and thought, this isn't how it's supposed to be? Whether it's shattered dreams, unexpected heartbreak, or life's twists that seem too heavy to bear, we've all been there. But what if those moments, the ones that feel so wrong, are actually setting us up for something greater? Today we're diving into It's Not Supposed to Be This Way by Lysa TerKeurst, a book that speaks directly to the heart of disappointment and the ways we can find hope even when life falls apart. In this video, I'll take you through the key insights, heartfelt reflections, and powerful truths from this deeply inspiring book. Whether you're navigating loss, battling unfulfilled expectations, or simply trying to understand why life isn't aligning with your plans, this summary is for you. Before we jump in, though, let's make a quick pact. If you find this video helpful, inspiring, or even just thought-provoking, do me a favor. Hit that like button to let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more book summaries that explore life-changing ideas. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Maybe share a moment when life didn't go as planned, or let me know what books you'd like me to summarize next. It's Not Supposed to Be This Way is a journey of finding God's presence and purpose in the midst of pain. And trust me, as we unpack the lessons here, you might just find a few answers for your own life too. So, grab a cozy spot, maybe a cup of coffee, and let's explore this beautiful message together. Because even when life isn't what we imagined, there's always a way to see it through new eyes. Ready? Let's begin. Have you ever found yourself staring at the pieces of your life, wondering how they got so scattered? That's exactly where Lysa TerKeurst begins in her book, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. Right from the first few pages, she lays it all bare. The heartbreak, the confusion, the moments when life feels like it's spinning wildly off track. Lysa's honesty is like a balm for the soul. She doesn't sugarcoat anything, which immediately made me feel like she was speaking directly to me, or at least to anyone who's ever faced a disappointment so sharp it takes your breath away. Lysa introduces a profound idea early on, the gap between our expectations and our reality. Isn't that such a relatable struggle? We all have this picture-perfect version of life in our heads, healthy relationships, fulfilling careers, happy families. But when reality doesn't match, it can feel like the floor drops out beneath us. Lysa describes this as living between two gardens, referring to the perfection of Eden and the promise of eternity, with all the brokenness of the here and now in between. This concept really hit home for me. It reminded me of a time when a long-term plan I'd worked so hard for fell apart. At the moment, it felt devastating. But hearing Lysa describe how God can meet us in these shattered places made me think, what if those cracks in our lives are where His light can seep in? One of the most poignant metaphors Lysa uses is that of dust. She writes about how God formed humanity from dust in Genesis, and how, in our broken moments, we often feel reduced to dust ourselves. Shattered, scattered, and completely unusable. But here's the twist. God doesn't see dust as useless. He sees it as a starting point for something new. This idea left me reflecting deeply. Think about it. When something breaks in your life, a dream, a relationship, a sense of purpose, it's easy to feel like all that's left is rubble. But Lysa flips the narrative, encouraging us to see the potential in what remains. God is an artist who creates beauty from the dust, and sometimes the most profound transformations start with a mess. Another powerful theme in this section is the weight of disappointment and how it's often heavier than we expect. Lysa recounts her personal struggles, including a heartbreaking betrayal in her marriage and health battles that left her questioning everything. Her vulnerability is striking, but so is her faith. She doesn't just sit in her pain, she invites us to wrestle with God alongside her. One line that stuck with me was when she said, "Disappointment isn't proof that God is withholding good things from us. Sometimes it's His way of leading us home." Wow. How often do we see disappointment as rejection rather than redirection? It made me think about the times I've felt abandoned by God, only to realize later that He was guiding me towards something better, or maybe just something I couldn't yet understand. Lysa also delves into the frustration of waiting. Oh, the dreaded waiting. Whether it's waiting for answers, healing, or simply clarity, it can feel endless and excruciating. But she reframes waiting as a season of preparation, not punishment. She uses the imagery of olive trees, which require years of pruning before they bear fruit. That perspective blew my mind a little. I couldn't help but think about how much of my life I've spent rushing to the next goal, the next chapter, the next thing I think will make me happy. But what if the waiting is where the growth happens? What if the pruning is part of the process? It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also strangely comforting. What I loved most about this section is Lisa's ability to balance raw honesty with hope. She doesn't pretend life is easy or that answers come quickly. Instead, she reminds us that it's okay to grieve, to question, and to struggle. But she also challenges us to trust, a kind of trust that isn't based on outcomes but on who God is. At times, though, her message felt almost too hopeful. I found myself wondering, what about those situations where the pain doesn't seem to lead to anything beautiful? But maybe that's the point. Faith doesn't always mean understanding sometimes. It just means holding on. Let's be honest, most of us like to feel in control of our lives. I know I do. Whether it's meticulously planning my day or setting long-term goals, there's something deeply satisfying about the illusion that we can map out our future. But Lisa doesn't hold back when she reminds us that control is just that, an illusion. She shares how trying to cling to control in the middle of her personal crises, her husband's infidelity and her devastating health diagnosis, left her feeling even more lost. The more she tried to fix things, the more helpless she became. It's a feeling I think we can all relate to. Sometimes life delivers a blow so unexpected that all our strategies and plans fall apart. Lisa encourages us to stop trying to control the uncontrollable and instead to surrender to God. At first, this idea frustrated me. Surrender feels so passive, doesn't it? But the way Lisa frames it is different. She's not saying we give up, she's saying we give in to the idea that God's plans, even when we don't understand them, are ultimately better than ours. One of my favorite parts of this section is when Lisa talks about how surrender isn't a sign of weakness but of strength. It's not about resigning ourselves to whatever happens, it's about actively choosing to trust. She uses the metaphor of planting seeds. When we surrender, it's like planting a seed in the dirt. We can't see what's happening underground, but with time, something beautiful can grow. This reminded me of a particularly tough season in my own life, when I had to let go of a career path I thought was my calling. At the time, it felt like failure. But looking back, I can see how that surrender opened the door to opportunities I never imagined. One of the most challenging but transformative ideas in this part of the book is Lisa's redefinition of God's goodness. She admits that for much of her life she equated God's goodness with her own comfort and happiness. If things were going well, God was good. If they weren't, she felt abandoned. But through her trials, she began to see that God's goodness isn't dependent on our circumstances. It's a part of who He is, no matter what we're going through. This shift in perspective hit me hard. How often do we judge God based on what He's doing for us, rather than who He is to us? One of the most comforting truths Lisa unpacks here is the promise of God's presence in our pain. She shares a beautiful analogy about how a potter works with clay. When clay is being molded, it's under constant pressure. But the potter never leaves it. His hands are always there, shaping it into something purposeful. This imagery is so powerful. It's a reminder that even when we feel like life is pressing in on us from all sides, God's hands are steady. He's not absent. He's closer than ever. Another key theme in this section is the importance of community. Lisa emphasizes that we're not meant to go through life's struggles alone. She opens up about how her closest friends supported her during her darkest moments, offering prayers, encouragement, and just a shoulder to lean on. This made me think about how often I try to carry my burdens alone. Maybe it's pride, or maybe it's fear of being vulnerable. But Lisa's words reminded me of the beauty of letting others into our pain. It's in those moments of connection that we often see God's love in action. I loved how practical this section felt. Lisa doesn't just tell us to surrender, she shows us how to do it. Her personal stories are so raw and relatable that they make the concepts come alive. That said, surrendering control is still such a hard pill to swallow. Even as I was reading, I caught myself thinking, but what if I just try one more thing to fix this situation? It's such a deeply ingrained habit to want to manage everything. As we step into the final part of It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, Lisa TerKeurst leads us through the healing process. This section is all about holding on to hope, even when the restoration you long for feels out of reach, and learning to trust that God's plan is unfolding, even when it looks completely different from your own. Lisa begins this section by unpacking the biblical promise of restoration. She points to scriptures that remind us God doesn't waste anything, not our pain, not our tears, not even the mistakes we make along the way. She emphasizes that restoration doesn't always mean getting back what we lost in the way we expect. Sometimes it's about God giving us something new, something better, even if it doesn't look like what we thought we wanted. This reminded me of a time I faced a broken relationship. For months, I prayed for reconciliation, believing it was the only way forward. When that didn't happen, I felt abandoned and confused. But over time, I realized that God had restored me in a different way, by giving me a sense of peace and self-worth I hadn't experienced before. Lisa's words affirmed that God's restoration often looks different than we imagine, but it's always exactly what we need. As we step into the final part of It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, Lisa TerKeurst leads us through the healing process. This section is all about holding on to hope, even when the restoration you long for feels out of reach, and learning to trust that God's plan is unfolding, even when it looks completely different from your own. The promise of restoration. Lisa begins this section by unpacking the biblical promise of restoration. She points to scriptures that remind us God doesn't waste anything, not our pain, not our tears, not even the mistakes we make along the way. She emphasizes that restoration doesn't always mean getting back what we lost in the way we expect. Sometimes it's about God giving us something new, something better, even if it doesn't look like what we thought we wanted. This reminded me of a time I faced a broken relationship. For months, I prayed for reconciliation, believing it was the only way forward. When that didn't happen, I felt abandoned and confused. But over time, I realized that God had restored me in a different way, by giving me a sense of peace and self-worth I hadn't experienced before. Lisa's words affirmed that God's restoration often looks different than we imagine, but it's always exactly what we need. One of the most profound lessons in this part of the book is Lisa's discussion about living in the in-between. She describes this as the space between our prayers and God's answers, between our pain and His promises. It's a hard place to be because it requires us to trust without clarity, to hope without guarantees. Lisa shares how she learned to embrace the in-between by leaning into God's Word. She explains how Scripture became her anchor, a constant reminder that God's faithfulness isn't based on her feelings, but on His character. This made me reflect on how often I let my emotions dictate my faith. When things are going well, it's easy to believe in God's goodness. But when life gets hard, doubt creeps in. Lisa's story challenged me to build my faith on something more solid, God's promises, not my circumstances. A recurring theme in this section is perspective. Lisa encourages us to view our struggles through the lens of eternity. She writes about how our pain, while deeply real and significant, is part of a much larger story. This isn't to diminish our suffering, but to remind us that it's not the end of the story. She uses the analogy of a tapestry. From the back, it looks like a chaotic mess of threads, knots, and tangles. But when you flip it over, you see the beautiful design that was being woven all along. Lisa suggests that our lives are like that tapestry. While we're in the middle of the mess, it's hard to see the purpose. But from God's perspective, every thread has its place. This shifted my perspective in a big way. It's so easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day struggles and forget that there's a bigger picture. Lisa's words reminded me to trust that God is weaving something beautiful, even if I can't see it yet. Hope is a central theme in this section, and Lisa doesn't shy away from acknowledging how hard it can be to hold on to hope when life feels dark. She shares her journey of finding hope not in the resolution of her circumstances, but in the presence of God. One of the most memorable moments is when she talks about the midnight moments of life, those times when you feel completely alone and uncertain. Lisa explains that these are often the times when God's presence is most palpable, if we're willing to seek Him. This reminded me of a difficult season when I felt like I was walking through life in a fog. It was only when I started to pray more honestly, laying all my fears and doubts before God, that I began to sense His presence in a new way. Lisa's words affirm that hope isn't about pretending everything is okay. It's about believing that God is with us, even when it's not. The final theme Lisa explores is trust, not just in God but also in others and in ourselves. She acknowledges how hard it can be to rebuild trust after it's been broken, whether by betrayal, disappointment, or loss. But she emphasizes that trust isn't something we achieve all at once. It's a journey, a daily decision to lean into faith, even when it feels risky. Lisa shares how she learned to trust God again after her husband's betrayal and her health struggles. Her transparency is so refreshing. She doesn't pretend it was easy or quick, but she shows how God met her in every step of the process. I loved how this section tied everything together with a message of hope and healing. Lisa's honesty about her own struggles makes her advice feel attainable, not out of reach. She doesn't offer a magic solution, she offers a process, one that requires patience, faith, and a willingness to let God work in His timing. One thing I wrestled with was the idea of seeing pain as a gift. Lisa talks about how some of her greatest growth has come from her hardest seasons, and while I understand the concept, it's a hard truth to accept. But as I reflected on my own life, I realized she's right. Some of my biggest breakthroughs have come on the other side of brokenness. And that brings us to the end of this journey through It's Not Supposed to Be This Way by Lysa TerKeurst. What a powerful reminder that even in life's hardest, most confusing moments, there's always hope, always purpose, and always a God who is closer than we think. If this book taught us anything, it's that life's detours, the shattered plans, the disappointments, the this isn't how it's supposed to be moments, aren't the end of the story. They're part of a bigger tapestry that we might not see clearly yet, but one that's being beautifully woven by hands far more skilled than ours. I hope this summary gave you a glimpse into the richness of Lysa's words and inspired you to look at your own life, especially the messy, painful parts, through a new lens. What if the moments that feel like endings are actually beginnings? What if the broken pieces in your life are the raw materials for something more beautiful than you can imagine? Did something in this summary resonate with you? Maybe a reminder that you're not alone in the waiting, or a challenge to surrender the control you've been clinging to? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it. It's a simple click for you, but makes a huge difference in helping others discover this channel. If you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Join us for more book summaries that dig deep into life's biggest questions and offer practical wisdom for navigating it all. Oh, and here's a challenge for you. Think of someone in your life who might need this message of hope and restoration. Share this video with them, it might be the encouragement they've been waiting for. Before we go, let me leave you with one final thought from Lysa's book. God doesn't leave us in the dust. He works with the dust to create something even more extraordinary. So, whatever you're facing today, remember, it's not supposed to be this way forever. Trust the process, trust the potter, and trust that even in the hardest moments, you're being shaped into something extraordinary. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep growing, keep hoping, and keep believing in the beauty of what's yet to come. Bye for now.